wonderful story of love. Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love. With the immortal strain, angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. 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 Though you are far away. Wonderful story of love.
That there is going to vibrate. All right, chapter 38 of Exodus. We'll read the first 7 verses and then discuss some of these things. And he made the altar of burnt offering of acacia wood, 5 cubits long, 5 cubits wide, square, and 3 cubits high. He made its horns on its 4 corners, its horns being of one piece with it, and he overlaid it with bronze. And he made all the utensils of the altar, the pails and the shovels and the basins, the flesh hooks and the fire pans. What's the flesh hooks, by the way? Yeah, that's literally what they are. Hooks that they use to grab meat with. The flesh hooks, the fire pans, he made all of its utensils of bronze. He made for the altar a grating of bronze network beneath, under its ledge, reaching halfway up. And he cast 4 rings on the 4 ends of the bronze grating as holders for the poles. He made the poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with bronze, and he inserted the poles into the rings on the sides of the altar with which to carry it. He made it hollow with planks. And so we've got made of acacia wood, overlaid with bronze. Everything else from chapter 37 was overlaid with gold. We've discussed this once before, but it was a number of chapters ago, somewhere around chapter 25 or something like that. Why was it bronze that these utensils were? Yeah, because they were used, and they were used around what? Around fire and offering these sacrifices, and that fire would have eventually melted the gold, and so bronze would be a much more durable service, and that's what God instructed them to be made with. The utensils were made out of bronze. The rings and poles were constructed for carrying. So the altar, just like in the Ark of the Covenant, was not to be carried by hand, but there was a system designed to carry it without holding it. Hollow with planks made according to all the instructions. Why in the world do we start this discussion in chapter 38 with the altar? I should have, and I didn't think about it until just now, should have stuck my slide back in that I had a number of weeks ago that had the layout of the temple and the courtyard and all that kind of stuff. Anybody remember where the altar was? It was in the courtyard in front of the tent, inside the barrier that went around, created a courtyard in front of the tent. It was placed in front of the door to the tent. So it's at the back of the courtyard near the tent. Now, there's 2 ways you can look at this. He just told us about the utensils that were on the inside, and he's just working his way out toward the outside of the thing. Or there's some significance to wanting to draw our attention to the altar. I think that the importance of the altar, and by the way, over in chapter 40, we'll get to in a week or two, that'll be the last chapter, in verse 6. If you read it, it tells you exactly where it was at. You shall set the altar of burnt offering in front of the doorway of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. Sacrifice was central to accessing God. You couldn't get into the tent of meeting without going past the altar. In fact, before the high priest went in to offer the sacrifices for the atonement year by year in the Holy of Holies, what did he have to do first? He had to offer sacrifice for his sins. Then he had to offer sacrifice for the sins of the people, and then he could go in and approach God. And so I think there is an aspect of this we need to understand that here this item is central to everything else that's going on. How much was the altar used? A lot. Constantly. You have all of the required sacrifices, but in addition to all of those required sacrifices, individuals had to do what? Had to go and make sacrifices for their sins and various things. They had to go to the priest to get that done. This thing was used constantly. And part of this process also supplied food for the Levites. So anyway, the idea that this was central, standing in between the people and the entrance to where God was. Because remember, God's in the Holy of Holies at the mercy seat. Well, the only way to get there is by sacrifice. And that, I think, has some significance symbolically. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Verse 8 talks about the laver. Moreover, he made the laver of bronze. What's a laver? A basin. Okay, what's a basin? Okay, a bowl. A washing bowl. A wash basin. Made the laver of bronze with its base of bronze from the mirrors of the serving women. I want to stop there for a moment, talk about this for just a minute, because I'm not sure that we completely give all the attention to that fact that we ought to. How valuable was a mirror to a woman in those days? They were not easy to come by. They were not inexpensive. They were made of polished bronze. It's not like you run down to the Walmart and pick up a $5 mirror that was made out of plastic and a cheap sheet of glass. This was prized possession stuff. The women gave up their mirrors so that this could be made. The mirrors of the serving women who served at the doorway of the tent of meeting. Which not only means that they gave up their mirrors and that every day that they didn't have a mirror, they were reminded of the fact that they gave up their mirrors, but every day they stood at work, what were they looking at? What used to be their mirrors. There was some sacrifice that went on here to do these things. Sometimes fulfilling the commands of God cost something. And sometimes fulfilling the commandments of God costs something that's precious and valuable to you. He made the court for the south side. The hangings of the court were of fine twisted linen, 100 cubits. That's 150 feet of stuff. 20 pillars. There are 20 sockets made of bronze. The hooks and the pillars and their bands were of silver. For the north side, there were 100 cubits. Their 20 pillars and their 20 sockets were of bronze, and the hooks and pillars of their bands were of silver. And for the west side, there were hangings of 50 cubits with their 10 pillars and their 10 sockets. The 10 hooks and 10 pillars of their bands were of silver. And for the east side, 50 cubits, and the hangings for the one side of the gate were 15 cubits with their 3 pillars and their 3 sockets. And so for the other side, on both sides of the gate of the court were hangings of 15 cubits with their 3 pillars and their 3 sockets. All the hangings of the court all around were of fine twisted linen. Where did all that come from? The stuff that was donated, they then spun and wove and put all this stuff together. The sockets for the pillars were of bronze, the hooks of the pillars and their bands of silver, the overlaying of their tops of silver, and all the pillars of the court were furnished with silver bands. And the screen of the gate of the court was the work of the weaver, of blue and purple and scarlet material, and fine twisted linen, and the length was 20 cubits, and the height was 5 cubits, corresponding to the hangings of the court. And their 4 pillars and their 4 sockets were of bronze, and their hooks were of silver, and the overlaying of the tops of their bands were of silver, and all of the pegs of the tabernacle and of the court all around were of bronze. Before I talk about the courtyard, I want to back up and touch on one more thing about the bronze laver that I intended to mention, and I just focused on other things and forgot about it. The significance of the mirrors. What was the laver for? It was the washing. That's where you went in to wash, so that you could be purified to do the work that you had to do. What are mirrors used for? Personal reflection, to look at yourself, to see if you're in order, see if all things are proper. They're now put into God's service to set things proper, to purify and to cleanse and to prepare someone. Now, James would later talk about a man who would go and look at his natural face in a mirror and forget what he saw. The fact that this laver of cleansing was made out of mirrors is somewhat significant as well, or we wouldn't be told that. Not only is this just a place to wash your hands, it's a place to reflect upon your character and to be certain that your heart and your mind is right. That process of washing was not just a physical process any more than the process of baptism is just a physical process. And the material that it was made from reflected that. No pun intended. All right, back to the courtyard. Curtains, pillars, sockets had to surround the court. There's a gate, an entry point, a place to get in. You didn't go in anywhere else. That's where you got in. It was carefully designed. It was carefully measured. All the pegs were to be made of bronze even. Specificity to the minutia. What color the fabrics were to be. How many poles there were to be. The sockets for the poles, because the poles, this is a tabernacle. It's intended to be portable. It's intended to be able to be taken down and moved and then set back up. You're not digging post holes and setting these things in the ground. So you have to have these sockets that you set on the ground to receive these poles and hold them. All of these things dictated size, place, number, material. Very specific. The court establishes boundaries and order. There was a difference between being outside of the gate and being in the gate. Access to God's presence was never a casual thing. There's only one entry. Who defines how we approach God? God. How many different ways does God provide to approach Him? One. What would Jesus later say that He was? He's the way, but not just that. He said He was the gate. Another place, the door. The specific way in which you can get where? Everyone who comes to the Father comes through me. Anybody that was going to enter into the courtyards and approach God had to go through that one doorway. God is only ever given one way to Him. You hear people sometimes in the world say, well, we're all on different roads, but they're all going to the same place. There is only one entry to God. It is not built by man. It is not defined by man. It is not opened or closed by man. The parameters of it, the nature of it, the existence of it, the place of it, all controlled by God. The enclosure here marks out what is holy. Obedience, we talk about obedience a lot. Obedience includes respecting God's set-apart spaces. Now, do we have a physical courtyard and tabernacle today? No. Do we have what they represent today? Yes. Do we need to respect that space? And what is that space? Obviously, the answer to the first question is yes. We need to respect that space. So what is that space? Anybody? Okay, the Lord's church. His assembly, His ecclesia, His called out people. But not just the people, but specifically what? The people assembled to approach God in worship. Should we take worship casually? Should we take liberties with worship? Is worship for us? Do we define worship? I'm going to tell you, the way it's practiced in the world, the answer to those questions are yes. And that's why worship today looks very different than worship 50 years ago or 100 years ago in most places. Worship looks very, very different. And if you go back 500 years or 1,000 years ago, it looks even more different. But if we're doing this right, if we're examining our hearts and we're approaching God on His terms, then it should look very much the same, no matter when or where it is. Now it gets, interesting to me, maybe not interesting to everybody. This is kind of an inventory of materials. This is the number of things for the tabernacle. It's verse 21, by the way. The tabernacle of the testimony, as they were numbered according to the command of Moses, for the service of the Levites by the hand of Ithamar, the son of Aaron, the priest. Now Bezalel, the son of Uriah, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, made all that the Lord had commanded Moses. So we got a specific individual in a specific family that was the craftsman. for these things. With him was Oholiab, the son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan, an engraver and a skillful workman and a weaver in blue and purple and scarlet material and fine linen. This guy was a very artistic man in a lot of different ways. All the gold that was used for the work, in all the work of the sanctuary, even the gold of the wave offering was 29 talents and 730 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. Now, we cannot with any certainty know exactly the weight of that. But scholars say that's possibly as much as 2,800 pounds of gold. And that's a lot of gold. Where did it come from? The people. Go back far enough, it was Egypt's. They gave it to the people on the way up, but the people gave. When there was the call, we need these materials. It's time to build the tabernacle. The people gave. How much did they give? They gave so much that they had to go back and tell them, okay, we've got enough. You can't give any more. The silver of those of the congregation who were numbered, 100 talents, 1,775 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, about 9,600 pounds. Now notice how it's worded here. The silver of those of the congregation. We even here yet have a reminder that it came from the people. According to the shekel of the sanctuary, a bekah, a head, that is half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary, for each one who passed over, to those who were numbered from 20 years old and upward, for 603,550 men. 603,550 men paid a bekah, a half a shekel, for each one of them. And the 100 talents of silver were for casting the sockets of the sanctuary and the sockets of the veil. 100 sockets for the 100 talents, a talent for a socket. I'm going to stop here for a moment in the middle of this inventory, just kind of to make sure that we're all thinking about things, and I think thinking about things and along the lines that they would have thought about things. Anybody ever been involved in any type of construction work? You? I have. Built houses for a while. To this very day, I can drive by those places, and you know what I say? I helped build that. You realize that every time one of them walked in there, they knew that the silver that they saw, they gave a portion of it. The gold that they saw, they gave a portion of it. The drapes, the tapestries, and all those other things, they gave the materials that were used to make those things. Or for the people who actually did the weaving and the engraving and the forming of those things, that was the work of their hands, that they contributed to that. I'm not sure that that is the way we look at what we are and what we have. That when we talk about the local church, we realize we're talking about ourselves and what we ourselves have done, what we are contributing. Sometimes we talk about the church in a very negative sense. You know who we're talking about, right? Ourselves. If the church has a problem, it means that we have a problem. We need to understand how we are invested Not just how God's invested. It's important we understand how God's invested. He built it. He purchased it with his blood. He causes the growth. It doesn't exist without God. But for each person that is in Christ, local congregations are a reflection of our work, who we are, what we do. And if the local congregation isn't measuring up, then it means that we are not measuring up. It's not God's failure. It's us. And so I want us to think about those kinds of things when we come in, when we engage in things, when we talk about doing things, when we are contributing to the service of God, just as they were contributing to the service of God. And just as certainly as it says here that, where was that? Back in verse 25, the silver of those of the congregation. We talk about the South College Road Church. We're talking about what we contribute and what we give and what we engage in and what we do. Down to verse 29, the bronze of the wave offering was 70 talents at 2,400 shekels, 6,700 pounds or so. And with it he made the sockets to the doorway of the tent of meeting, and the bronze altar, and its bronze grating, and all the utensils of the altar, and the sockets of the court all around, the sockets of the gate of the court all around, the pegs of the tabernacle, and the pegs of the court all around. Notice it doesn't say anything about the bronze laver. We know where that bronze came from, the women's mirrors. Which also opens up an interesting discussion about that, which is simply this. Clearly, God ordered a specific source of silver for that labor. Bronze. The bronze for all the other stuff that was bronze came from the wave offerings of the people. But that bronze came from the mirrors of some very specific people. Every gift was accounted for. A couple of chapters ago, we read about all these people giving, these people bringing and giving and giving and giving and giving, and so much so that they had more than they needed. Every gift was accounted for. Assigned for something, used for something specific. We have a record, an amount, what went into it, exact weights of gold, silver, bronze. They're all listed for us. All contributions are measured and applied to the specific purposes that God asked for. Every contribution matters and is remembered, no matter how big or small. I'm reminded of Jesus when he set himself up across from the table where they were giving at the temple, and he watched the people give. And who was the one that Jesus drew attention to? A poor widow who gave what? A small pittance, a penny in our vet. Such a small amount, we're not even going to make those things anymore. We've decided that pennies are too small to mess with. All of these people giving lots of money, she gives a small pittance of money, and yet that's the one that Jesus takes note of, makes an example out of. Why? Because she gave earnestly from the heart all that she had, while the rest of the people were giving out of their what? Out of what was extra. They lived the way that they wanted to live and spent money on everything they wanted to spend money on. And if there was anything extra, they gave it to God. Understand every contribution matters and is remembered if it is offered cheerfully and of faith. God notices everything that we do. The people's giving back in chapters 35 and 36 was not wasted. It was used purposefully. We should also recall that God's work involves both heart-stirred giving and precise, faithful use of what is given. That's why it matters so much. For the men in the room and a few of the ladies who have sat waiting for the men in the room, that's why sometimes those business meetings turn into an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or longer. Because it matters and it shouldn't be taken for granted. Accountability and transparency is part of the work of God. You notice God is being very transparent here. He is telling everyone, this is exactly how much was taken. This is exactly how much was used. I'll also ask this question. Do you hear anything or read anything in here about he kept back a store for savings? He took what was needed and put it to use. When it got to be too much, what was God's response? Keep it for yourselves. Is it okay to keep the extra? Absolutely. That's what he told them to do. Okay. We've got enough. Is it okay to keep what's needed? What if the people had held back a portion? Well, let's ask it this way. What if the people had held back a portion and then pretended like they were giving all that they had? I gave that away too well. I should have been more cryptic in my description. Yeah, we know what happened to Ananias and Sapphira for that very thing. And so the heart becomes extremely important in this question. We have the heart of the widow compared to the heart of Judas, or of Ananias and Sapphira, or of any number of other people. Exodus 38 continues to show how obedience, order, sacrifice, and consecration mark the work of God's people. This is another chapter, just like chapter 37, that's highlighting that God's people are obedient to him, that God's people act in an orderly fashion, that God's people are people who sacrifice, and that God's people are people who are consecrated. What does that word consecrated mean? Set apart for a particular thing and purpose. Has that ever changed? Has God's people ever been anything other than obedient, ordered, sacrificial, and consecrated for his use? No. Well, yes. That's the kind of question that the answer to the question is no. God's people have never been anything other than that if they're acting properly. Every detail is built. Verse 21. Where's it at? Just as the Lord had commanded Moses. God's presence required a holy place, a place for him to be that was holy. It required a prepared people. Not just anyone could go. Only people who were prepared. And it required a faithful offering. And I would submit that hasn't changed. That's the way it is today. The church is not built on invention our zeal alone, but on obedience to God's revealed pattern. See that you make everything according to the pattern. It comes from the Old Testament. That's what they did here. The book of Hebrews brings it up again. See that you make everything according to the pattern. Reverent service and shared devotion. Is anything less than that? There's not a good way to say this. Is anything less than that truly the church? Right. And I'm reminded of Revelation 2 and 3. Okay, where you do see the patience of God being displayed in those chapters, and you see his extreme grace being shown. But warnings everywhere that if you don't do it this way, what's going to happen? Your candlestick's going to be removed. Now, that was one of the things that was in the temple, right? And we talked about that. We talked about the fact that it showed light, which is what the gospel does. It's what Jesus did. It's what God is. God is the purveyor and the originator of light. Light came from God before there was a sun. When it says, I will remove your candlestick, he's saying, you know what? If you will not repent and become what you ought to be, you're not identified with me anymore. So there's a point in which if we fail to be obedient to God's pattern, reverent in our service, and engaged in shared devotion to God, when he won't be here anymore. It doesn't take much for him to be here. How many people does it take for him to be here? I mean, to begin with, if you're a child of God, he says, lo, I am with you always. So I'm never alone. But then you got that where 2 or 3 are together in my name, I am in your midst. Doesn't take a lot of people, but it takes a certain character. And a certain heart. Lord willing, we will be in chapter 39 next time, where we get to Aaron's garments. Some interesting stuff to talk about there. And then we will be in chapter 40 after that, and we'll be done with this study.
Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love.